It only took 14 seconds for the silence in that studio to turn into thunder. The kind of thunder that does not come from clouds, but from a crowd that suddenly realizes it has witnessed something powerful. Two women sat across from each other that night. Ivanka Trump, calm and confident, every hair in place, every word rehearsed. Across from her sat Jasmine, calm in a different way, the kind of calm that comes from having nothing to prove but everything to stand for. The studio lights were bright and hot, bouncing off the polished desk between them. Cameras pointed from every angle, red lights blinking. The audience sat just beyond the stage, a sea of quiet faces waiting to be entertained. The air was thick with the hum of expensive equipment and the low rustle of papers. It felt like any other night of television. Another polite discussion. Another chance for sound bites and smiles. The host greeted them both, setting a light tone. Ivanka smiled, poised and graceful, as if she had been born in that chair. Jasmine nodded respectfully, her hands folded neatly, her eyes steady. The cameras zoomed in for their first close-ups. At that moment, there was no sign that the room would soon hold its breath. Ivanka spoke first, her voice smooth, her tone careful. She leaned forward slightly, talking about leadership, values, and what it means to represent a nation. Every gesture was practiced. Every smile seemed to have been tested in a mirror. Jasmine listened, waiting her turn, not interrupting, not performing. When Jasmine spoke, her words carried warmth and weight. She spoke like someone who had seen the things she was talking about. No filter. No pretense. Just truth wrapped in calm confidence. The contrast between them was striking. One seemed rehearsed. The other real. For a while it stayed civil. The conversation drifted between politics and personality. The audience watched politely. The host nodded along. But there was something underneath the surface, something building quietly with every exchange. What started as a polite conversation began to sound like a test. Ivanka's tone sharpened just a little. Her smile lingered a little too long after certain comments. Jasmine stayed composed, her expression unreadable. There was no shouting. No raised voices. Only tension hiding in polite words. Then came a pause, a small one where even the cameras seemed to lean in. No one knew it yet, but that pause was the beginning of something unforgettable. Because when Ivanka tried to embarrass Jasmine, she did not know what she was walking into. She did not know that the next 14 seconds would flip the entire room. Before we get into what really happened in those 14 unforgettable seconds, make sure you hit subscribe and turn on notifications. This channel breaks down the moments that change everything, the kind that make headlines and stay in people's minds long after the cameras stop rolling. So if you enjoy stories that reveal how one moment can flip the whole room, you will want to stay with us. Let us get back to the story. The studio that night was set for a special political panel. It was one of those talk shows where opinions mix with personalities, and every moment is captured from 3 camera angles. The topic was leadership and representation, and the producers knew the lineup would draw attention. On one side sat Ivanka Trump. On the other sat Congresswoman Jasmine. Ivanka was television perfection. She wore a smooth white blazer, her hair and makeup flawless under the studio lights. She had been on countless stages before, speaking for brands, policies, and family ideals. Her voice was calm, her expressions controlled. She was used to bright lights and polite applause. Every answer sounded like it had been tested and trimmed until it was just right. Jasmine had a different kind of presence. She was younger, newer to the national stage, but carried herself with confidence. Her style was simple, her tone direct, and her eyes steady. She had come from a background far from privilege, and her rise to Congress had not been handed to her. People knew her for her sharp intelligence and her honesty. She spoke like someone who believed every word mattered. The host welcomed both women and thanked them for being there. The audience clapped lightly, then settled into silence as the cameras rolled. On the surface it was just another discussion. But there was already something different about the air in that room. It felt charged, like the calm before a storm that no one could see yet. Ivanka leaned forward slightly as the first question came in. She smiled and spoke about the importance of women in leadership. Her answers were polished and smooth, with careful words that sounded practiced. She used stories about her father's administration and her experience in business to make her points. Her tone carried authority, but it also carried distance, like someone explaining the world from a balcony. When it was Jasmine's turn, she spoke slowly, choosing her words with purpose. Her message was rooted in her own experience, not in theory. She talked about what leadership means when people are struggling, when promises fall short, and when communities need someone to show up. Her words were not elegant in the rehearsed sense, but they carried emotion and weight. The contrast between them became clear within minutes. Ivanka was all polish and precision, the image of control. Jasmine was raw truth wrapped in confidence. One came from a place where power was inherited. The other had fought for every inch of it. That unspoken difference gave every sentence a second meaning. You could see it in their faces. Ivanka smiled politely whenever Jasmine spoke, but the smile was tight, almost like she was waiting for her turn to correct something. Jasmine did not take the bait. She kept her focus on the conversation, not the reactions. Every time Ivanka adjusted her hair or leaned in with a pointed smirk, Jasmine's stillness became its own kind of power. The audience noticed too. Some nodded at Ivanka's polished points, but others leaned forward during Jasmine's words. It was not about who was more experienced. It was about who was more real. The cameras kept shifting between them, catching every flicker of emotion, every small movement. The discussion stayed professional, but there were small hints of tension building. The kind that does not need raised voices to be felt. Ivanka's tone grew a little sharper when Jasmine disagreed with her. Her laughter at one point was a touch too long, as if trying to mask irritation. Jasmine remained composed, her voice steady, her gaze never wavering. Underneath it all was the question that no one had spoken out loud. Who truly belonged here? Was it the woman born into the highest circles of power, or the woman who had earned her seat through grit and persistence? That question hung quietly between every exchange, every polite nod, every short laugh. As the conversation moved on, the energy in the room shifted again. The host sensed the edge but let it continue. The audience could feel that something was about to happen. And they were right. Because what came next was not just about words or arguments. It was about tone, power, and presence. It was about what happens when someone who is used to being respected decides to test someone who has earned that respect the hard way. The conversation began smoothly. The host introduced both women with glowing words, setting a tone of mutual respect. The topic was women's leadership in politics and the growing influence of female voices in government. Ivanka Trump spoke first, her delivery calm and measured, every word polished. She talked about representation, empowerment, and responsibility. It sounded like a speech she had given before, carefully rehearsed, refined for television. The audience listened with polite attention. When it was Jasmine Crockett's turn, her tone was very different. She spoke with raw honesty. Her words carried emotion, not performance. She talked about the hard road many women walk, especially those who do not come from privilege. Her voice had the weight of experience. People leaned forward. They could feel she was speaking from the heart, not from a script. The host smiled, sensing the contrast but keeping things balanced. The discussion moved from leadership to social policy. Ivanka nodded gracefully, responding with familiar talking points about opportunity and balance. Jasmine listened carefully. She kept her expression calm, but her eyes said she was analyzing every word. She waited for her turn, choosing not to interrupt. There was an air of politeness, but something under it was shifting. Ivanka's sentences carried a kind of certainty, as if she was describing a world where everyone had equal footing. Jasmine's tone, though respectful, hinted at a reality less polished. The tension between image and experience was growing quietly in the space between them. The host lightened the atmosphere with a quick joke. Ivanka laughed softly, the kind of practiced laugh that fits television perfectly. The camera caught the sparkle in her jewelry and the precision in her posture. Jasmine smiled too, but hers was smaller, more restrained. Her smile seemed to say, "I am here to listen, but I am not impressed." The conversation moved again, this time toward how women face criticism in public life. Ivanka mentioned resilience and grace, how important it is to rise above negativity. Her words were smooth, elegant, almost rehearsed poetry. Jasmine nodded, but her expression hinted that grace alone was not enough when the system itself was unbalanced. The camera captured every small movement. Ivanka's smile did not fade. Her hands rested neatly in her lap. Jasmine's shoulders stayed square, her focus steady. The air in the studio started to feel heavier, though no one raised their voice. It was the kind of tension that grows quietly, second by second. Then, as the host prepared to introduce the next segment, Ivanka turned slightly toward Jasmine. Her expression softened, but her eyes flickered with something sharper. The smile stayed, but its warmth faded. The audience did not notice right away, but the cameras caught it perfectly. A small smirk appeared. In that instant, something shifted. The energy in the room changed. Jasmine saw it, paused for half a second, and then took a slow breath. She stayed composed, her eyes steady, her posture unshaken. The smirk may have seemed small, but it carried weight. It was the spark before the storm, the first quiet sign that something much bigger was about to unfold beneath the studio lights. The conversation had seemed calm enough. The tension was there, but it stayed hidden beneath polite smiles and practiced tones. The host was ready to move to another topic, something light to balance the serious discussion. But Ivanka leaned forward slightly, tilting her head with that polished calm she always carried. Her smile stayed fixed as she spoke, and her words slipped out almost too easily. She said, "Well, maybe Jasmine would be more comfortable focusing on issues from her own community. Or maybe back in Africa." The words hung in the air. They were quiet but sharp. The audience did not know how to react at first. A few awkward laughs broke through, followed by silence. Then came the gasps. The kind that come when something you were not supposed to hear has just been said. The host froze mid-smile. His eyes flickered between the two women, unsure if he should step in or let it play out. Ivanka's expression did not change. She looked satisfied, calm, as if she had just made a clever remark. The camera zoomed slightly, catching the faint curl of her lips. It was a smile but not a kind one. Behind it was something colder, something that showed she knew exactly what she had said. Jasmine stayed still. Her hands rested on the table, fingers interlocked. She did not flinch. Her eyes stayed on Ivanka, studying her. The studio was silent now, and the silence itself felt heavy. You could feel the discomfort spreading across the room. The audience had gone from entertained to uneasy in a matter of seconds. The host tried to move on. "All right, let us keep this respectful," he said softly, almost whispering into the tension. But the moment was already alive. The tone of the room had changed. The energy was different. Every camera, every light, every person in the audience could feel that something real had just happened. Ivanka leaned back, still smiling, adjusting the cuff of her sleeve as if nothing had happened. Her body language said it all. She thought she had control. She thought Jasmine would take the insult quietly, smile through it, and move on like nothing had happened. That was how these moments usually went on television. But Jasmine stayed silent. Her stillness carried more weight than any words could. She blinked once, slowly, her expression unreadable. It was the kind of silence that makes everyone in the room hold their breath without even realizing it. For a moment, time felt slower. The host stopped speaking. The camera stayed locked on their faces. The audience did not move. Everyone was waiting for Jasmine's response. The pause stretched longer than anyone expected. In those seconds, you could feel the power shifting. Ivanka's confidence began to look thinner, almost forced. Jasmine was not giving her the reaction she wanted. The silence was building its own kind of pressure. Then Jasmine smiled. It was small, calm, and it carried a message that said, "You just made a mistake." But she did not speak. Not yet. She let the silence sit there, let it grow heavy enough for everyone to feel its weight. It was the kind of moment where words were not needed because everyone in the room already knew that something had changed. And in that silence, Ivanka Trump realized she had just crossed a line that would not go unanswered. The studio felt frozen. No one moved. No one spoke. The camera stayed locked on both women, waiting for something to happen. The hum of the lights above seemed louder now. Every tiny sound echoed in that space, from the rustle of papers on the desk to the faint shuffle of someone's shoe in the front row. The audience leaned forward, eyes darting between Ivanka and Jasmine. The host looked uneasy, his smile tight and forced. He glanced toward the producers behind the cameras, but even they stayed still. Everyone was waiting to see who would break the silence first. Ivanka sat back in her chair with that faint, polished smile still on her face. Her chin was lifted slightly, her hands neatly folded in front of her. You could see the confidence in her posture. She thought the moment was hers. To her, the silence meant victory. She believed Jasmine had no words. But the silence kept stretching. 1 second. 2. Then 5. The air grew heavier with each passing moment. The crowd was no longer just quiet. They were holding their breath. You could feel the weight of those seconds pressing down on everyone. Jasmine stayed still. Her eyes never left Ivanka. Her breathing was calm, steady, measured. It was the kind of stillness that comes from control, not shock. You could almost see her thinking, shaping her response in her mind. 7 seconds. Ivanka's smile flickered just for a moment. It was small, almost invisible, but it was there. The confidence in her eyes began to soften. 10 seconds. The host shifted in his chair. The audience had not made a sound. Some of them looked uncomfortable, others fascinated. The silence was no longer about hesitation. It had become a statement of its own. 12 seconds. Ivanka glanced toward the host, maybe hoping he would say something, maybe realizing that her words were still hanging in the air, exposed and ugly. 13 seconds. Jasmine took a slow breath in. Her hands stayed where they were. Her eyes softened, but her expression stayed firm. 14 seconds. A small inhale. That was all it took. The room was still quiet, but something in the air had changed. The silence was no longer in Ivanka's control. It belonged to Jasmine now. She had turned it into her power. And then, finally, Jasmine began to speak. Jasmine turned her head slowly toward Ivanka. The movement was calm, deliberate, and quiet enough that everyone could see it. Her expression stayed steady, her tone unshaken. The studio was still tense, every eye locked on the two women. Jasmine took a small breath and spoke in a voice that was clear, even, and unhurried. "Tell me, Ivanka," she said. "Is Donald Trump your father or your boss?" For a second no one made a sound. It was like the air had been pulled out of the room. The question hit harder because of how softly it was delivered. There was no anger in her voice, no raised tone, just pure composure. Then came the reaction. A wave of gasps spread across the audience. You could hear someone in the back drop a pen. The cameras moved instantly, trying to capture Ivanka's face. The host froze with his mouth half open, eyes wide. The silence broke, but not into noise, it broke into energy. The whole room felt alive again. Ivanka blinked, stunned. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. Her polished confidence began to fade. The smile she had worn all evening slipped away. The calm mask she had built so carefully cracked just enough for the cameras to see. Jasmine did not move. She did not smile or lean back. She just sat there holding eye contact. The power had shifted completely. You could feel it in the way the audience looked at her now, with respect, even awe. The same crowd that had half laughed a few minutes ago was now watching her in silence, realizing that she had taken full control of the moment without raising her voice. Ivanka looked toward the host, then down at her notes, pretending to adjust a page. But the cameras had already captured the moment. The expression on her face told the story. She had tried to embarrass Jasmine, and it had backfired in front of millions. Jasmine finally looked away, her eyes turning back to the host as if nothing unusual had happened. Her tone was steady as she continued the discussion, shifting the focus back to policy and leadership. She did not linger on the moment or try to draw attention to it. She let the audience decide what they had just witnessed. The host stuttered slightly, then smiled awkwardly. He tried to pull the conversation back, but the energy in the room had already changed. The cameras caught glimpses of people in the audience shaking their heads, whispering to each other. Some were smiling, others just stunned by how effortlessly Jasmine had turned the situation around. Ivanka sat quieter now. Her body language had softened, her gaze lowered. She looked less like the confident daughter of a political dynasty and more like someone realizing that charm and privilege were not enough in that moment. Jasmine stayed exactly as she was, calm, focused, and unshaken. She spoke with the same confidence she had started with, but now everyone was listening differently. Every word carried weight. Every pause felt intentional. It was more than just a comeback. It was a lesson. Jasmine had shown that power does not always come from speaking louder or reacting first. It comes from knowing when to stay silent, when to wait, and when to strike with words that cannot be ignored. By the time the segment ended, the audience was still buzzing. Clips of the exchange were already being shared online before the credits rolled. Commentators would call it the moment Jasmine Crockett flipped the room. But in the studio it felt simpler than that. She had not shouted. She had not insulted. She had not even smiled. She had won through composure, timing, and truth. And as the cameras faded out, one thought lingered for everyone watching. That is how you win without shouting. Ivanka tried to recover. You could see it in the way she shifted in her seat, her shoulders tightening as she forced a small laugh. It was the kind of laugh people give when they are trying to make something uncomfortable disappear. Her eyes darted toward the host, silently asking for help. The charm that had carried her through the start of the interview was gone. What replaced it was unease. She spoke again, her tone lighter but shaky. "Oh, it is just politics," she said with a quick smile. "I did not mean anything by it." The words came out wrong. They sounded defensive, not casual. You could feel the audience pull back a little, unsure whether to accept it or not. Some in the crowd looked down, others folded their arms. The energy had changed completely. The host jumped in quickly, trying to smooth things over. "Let us move forward," he said, his voice cheerful but strained. "We are here to talk about women's leadership, not personal jabs." He laughed awkwardly, but no one joined him. The cameras panned between the faces on stage and the contrast was clear. Ivanka looked smaller now, not physically but in presence. Her poise was slipping with every second. The confidence that once filled the room was gone. She nodded along to the next question, her eyes fixed on the table, pretending to listen. Her hands fidgeted slightly, fingers tapping against her notepad. Every camera caught it. Jasmine, on the other hand, stayed still. She did not react or speak. She just listened, calm and collected, letting the silence and her earlier words carry their own weight. She no longer needed to prove anything. The room had already decided where the respect belonged. The audience's attention had shifted entirely toward Jasmine. Every time she spoke, the room leaned in. Every time Ivanka tried to speak again, the energy dimmed a little. The voiceover filled the moment like a quiet reflection. This was not just about words. It was about presence. It was about who held moral gravity in that space. One person had power through reputation. The other earned it through composure. And that difference, in front of millions watching, was impossible to ignore. Jasmine waited for the host to finish speaking. The air was still heavy, the crowd still caught between disbelief and admiration. Then she leaned slightly forward, her voice calm, clear and steady. There was no hint of anger, only purpose. "I belong in every room where the future is being discussed," she said. "And I will not shrink to make anyone comfortable." The words carried through the studio with quiet force. There was no need to raise her voice. The power came from how certain she sounded. Every syllable landed with weight. People in the audience nodded slowly, some already clapping before she had even finished. She continued, her tone firm but warm. "Women like me were not always invited to these tables. But we built the roads that lead to them. We carry the voices of those who work twice as hard for half the credit. So when I speak for those who are still fighting to be heard." The audience erupted into applause. It was not the usual polite kind that comes after a good point. It was louder, deeper, almost emotional. The cameras caught people standing, cheering, while others just smiled quietly, feeling the truth of her words. Ivanka looked toward Jasmine, her expression unreadable. The poise she once had was gone. She knew the room had shifted completely. The cameras were no longer looking at her. They were locked on Jasmine, capturing a moment that felt bigger than the show itself. Jasmine let the applause fade before she spoke again. "This is not about me or her. It is about what happens when we mistake privilege for perspective. Real leadership is not about where you come from. It is about how you use your platform to lift others." The host, now visibly moved, nodded slowly. His earlier tension was gone. The crowd stayed silent, listening. The moment had turned into something far beyond a television debate. It had become a message, one that spoke to the balance between grace and strength, between power and truth. Jasmine took a breath and finished with the same composure she had started with. "We are all here because we care about the future. And that future must include every story, every struggle, every triumph. Not just the ones that fit neatly into privilege." As her final words echoed through the studio, the room stood again. The applause rolled like a wave, lasting long after she stopped speaking. It was the kind of reaction that could not be planned. You could feel the energy shift from polite admiration to genuine respect. The narrator's voice cut in softly, reflecting on what had just happened. This was more than a comeback. It was a reminder of what authenticity looks like when it stands next to entitlement. In that moment, the dynamic between wealth and lived experience was laid bare. It was a picture of modern politics. One side polished and rehearsed, the other grounded and real. And the audience knew exactly which one had spoken from truth. In a room designed to favor the polished, the powerful, and the privileged, one voice of truth flipped it all in 14 seconds. As the cameras zoomed out, Jasmine sat quietly, her expression calm and steady. She did not need to celebrate. The moment itself had already spoken for her. When the clip hit the internet, it spread like wildfire. Within hours, millions had seen it. People were replaying those 14 seconds again and again, breaking down every glance, every word, and every pause. What started as a tense exchange inside a polished studio turned into a global conversation about power, respect, and authenticity. Supporters of Jasmine Crockett filled comment sections with praise. They called her calm under pressure inspiring. Many said she showed exactly what it means to stay composed when someone tries to undermine you. Her words, "I belong in every room where the future is being discussed," began trending. Screens across social media were filled with clips of her standing firm, her expression steady, her tone measured. It became more than a response. It became a moment of representation for every woman who has ever been underestimated. On the other side, critics of Ivanka Trump started asking questions. People began to notice the way her smile had tightened after Jasmine spoke. They pointed out her awkward attempt to recover the moment, saying that it revealed more than she intended. For some, it was a reminder that composure can crack when confidence is challenged by truth. For others, it was proof that the old kind of political polish no longer holds the same power it once did. Media outlets could not resist covering it. Talk shows replayed the clip. Analysts debated what it meant for the image of both women. Articles described Jasmine as the embodiment of modern political poise. Others said Ivanka's reaction exposed how disconnected elite figures can seem when faced with grounded, lived experience. For once, the story was not about wealth or fame. It was about character in real time. The voiceover in one viral recap said it best. In the age of cameras, character is tested live. You cannot fake grace under pressure. It shows. That single line summed up why the moment hit so deeply. People are used to political debates that feel rehearsed, where emotion is managed and truth feels filtered. But this time nothing was scripted. It was spontaneous, raw, and human. Within days, Jasmine's short response became symbolic in a way she may not have expected. Commentators began calling it the 14-second flip. Universities used it in discussions on communication and power dynamics. Activists replayed it at events, showing how tone, confidence, and purpose can speak louder than status. For a generation growing up in the digital era, it became an example of what authenticity really looks like under pressure. By the time the dust settled, it was clear that something had shifted. Those 14 seconds had exposed the contrast between appearance and presence. They reminded everyone that real influence does not come from a last name or a designer suit. It comes from clarity, conviction, and the courage to speak truthfully, even when the room feels stacked against you. In the end, the story of Ivanka Trump and Jasmine Crockett was about more than a televised exchange. It was a lesson in how quickly power can change hands when confidence meets composure. And as the clip continues to resurface, it carries a message that keeps echoing across timelines and talk shows. Respect cannot be demanded. It is earned in real time, under pressure when everyone is watching. Real power does not always come from the loudest voice in the room. It comes from the one that stays steady when others lose control. Jasmine Crockett proved that in just 14 seconds. She did not raise her tone or match sarcasm with sarcasm. She simply stood her ground and spoke truth with clarity. That moment reminded everyone watching that confidence built on purpose cannot be shaken by mockery. When you look back, those few seconds did more than silence a room. They reshaped how people saw both women. Ivanka Trump walked in with influence and status, but Jasmine walked out with respect. That is the difference between image and impact. One fades as soon as the cameras turn off. The other keeps growing because it connects to something real. Moments like that show how much timing matters. A calm pause, a focused breath, and the right words at the right time can change how millions think. In a world full of noise, composure stands out. People remember the person who stays clear and grounded even when challenged. That is where true leadership shows itself. Because sometimes the strongest answer is silence until it isn't. That pause, followed by a single line of truth, can echo louder than any argument. Jasmine's moment was proof that stillness can carry power, and that respect is earned by presence, not privilege. If you want more powerful stories like this, do not forget to subscribe, like, and share this video. Your support helps us keep telling the stories that deserve to be remembered. Stay tuned because the next story might just change the way you see power again.